We are officially 5 months into 2023 and I've already added around 48 books to my TBR. My TBR is absolutely out of control, but let's talk about some of the books I recently added to my TBR. Firstly, I'm not sure if this counts, but I want to finish Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. Now, I started reading this book around 2 months ago and I got to page around 600, but I then decided to put it down because I just didn't feel much enjoyment reading this book. But everyone raves about how the conclusion of this book is so good. So I really want to get to the end just to see if I actually will finally fall in love with my last son. But the really fortunate thing is that the more time that goes by, the less certain I am actually that this series will be for me, because it's been around 1 month now and I've felt around 0% motivation to actually continue the series, which is really unfortunate. But I will get to the end of this book at least, so don't worry, my last son fans, I'll definitely get to the end to see if I'll actually fall in love with the series. But yeah, I don't really have high hopes, unfortunately. Now, I also recently added the Heist Trilogy by R.J. Barker to my TBR. Now, initially I didn't have any plans to actually read the series, but seeing how many glowing reviews are on Goodreads, and maybe more importantly, the fact that I just received this beautiful edition from the Broken Binding. I mean, just look at this end paper. How amazing is that? I mean, this must be one of the most beautiful editions from the Broken Binding yet, and it just looks absolutely gorgeous. So now I'm definitely intrigued, and I actually haven't read anything by R.J. Barker, even though I own 4 of his books, I think. So I really need to read some of his work, and actually I'm really tempted to maybe do a read-along for this trilogy. I'm currently trialing a Discord server for my Patreons, and I might actually open that up, and maybe we could potentially do a read-along for this trilogy. Maybe 1 book per month starting from June. Definitely let me know your thoughts if you're interested in doing that. And then we have Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin. This is an ARC I received from ARC. Actually, the author himself contacted me and asked if I wanted to receive an ARC, and I believe this was originally a self-published book, but it's then been picked up by Orbit Books, and apparently it's been revised and edited again. So this story is apparently a bit different than the self-published story. But if I'm being totally honest, I haven't heard that much about this story, and I actually know almost nothing about it, but I actually want to keep it that way. So I'm definitely hoping to actually read this book before it releases sometimes later this year. So we will see what happens. But yeah, thank you so much for Orbit for sending me this book. And then we have this chunky book, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. Now, most of you know that I read The Private Orange Tree last year, and I didn't really enjoy it that much. I gave it, I think, 3 stars. Not a bad book by any means. I mean, the world building was phenomenal, the prose was great, but I just really felt like the ending was so rushed and the pacing was all over the place. But man, I love these covers, and this is the Broken Binding edition. These edges are insane, man. And I've heard a lot of people say that A Day of All Night is actually a better book than The Private Orange Tree, and I just love the world that Samantha has actually crafted in this series. So I'm definitely curious to see if actually I'll finally fall in love with this series. So I'm definitely looking forward to reading this book, but it is chunky, so I'll definitely need to commit some time to it. If you read A Day of All Night, definitely let me know your thoughts if it's worth reading, or even if it's better than The Private Orange Tree, because I really hope it is. And then we have Chest of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I feel like everyone on YouTube has already read this book, and I know I'm late to the party, but it's only because this book was recently published in the UK. I had no idea why we had to wait 3 months, but lo and behold, the book is finally here, and I recently had my birthday and actually went out and bought this book as a birthday gift to myself. I mean, I just love these white covers so much, and it's not that long, and I've heard so many great things about this book. And the great thing is that this is actually a standalone, which we don't have that much of in the fantasy community. So yeah, if you read The Chest of the Emerald Sea, I mean, I've almost only heard great things. Definitely let me know your thoughts if it's worth picking up. But I'm definitely planning on reading this relatively soon, so I'm really hoping that I'll absolutely love it, because yeah, I love Brandon Sanderson. Now, if you're a frequent watcher of mine, then you know that I'm almost primarily read fantasy, but I do want to dip my toes a bit more into the sci-fi genre, and a lot of people say that if you're struggling with the sci-fi genre because it's maybe too heavy on the science, then an author I should definitely pick up is Blake Crouch. Now, I actually own 3 of his books, and these are all signed. They're not that long, and they're all standalones, and these just sound like they should be right up my alley. People say they're mind-bending, they say the prose is accessible, and overall, almost everyone just seems to absolutely love these books. Now, I'm not really sure which order I should read them first, but most people usually recommend either Dark Matter or Recursion, so I'll probably read one of these 2 first. And a lot of people say that Upgrade is not a bad book, but it's definitely not as good as these. We will see what happens, but I definitely want to read some more sci-fi this year, and Blake Crouch just sounds like the author that should be right up my alley. So hopefully this will actually convince me that sci-fi is a genre for me than I actually think at the moment. So yeah, we will see. And speaking of sci-fi, another author I really want to give a read this year is Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater series, or The Emperor of the Silence. Now, I believe there are around 5 books in the series at the moment, but I do think that he plans on writing 2 more books. So I think this will be a 7-book series, which is really cool, and everyone raves about how phenomenal this series is, and a lot of people say it's very underrated, which sounds great. I love love finding underrated books. But yeah, I don't really know much about the series, except some people say that if you love Red Rising, then you might also love this series. And as already mentioned, I have struggled quite a lot with the sci-fi genre, but a lot of people say that there's almost like a blend of fantasy and sci-fi as well in this series, so we will see. But yeah, I'm really hopeful that I'll actually absolutely fall in love with this series. And then we have The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. I'm currently reading The Dandelion Dynasty. I read the first 2 books and they have been so good. Now, The Paper Menagerie is a short story collection and people say it's one of the best short story collections they have ever read, so that just makes me excited. And yeah, after having read the first 2 books in Dandelion Dynasty, I am confident I really need to explore all of Ken Liu's work because he is such an amazing author. So yeah, there's no doubt that I'll definitely try to get to The Paper Menagerie later this year. And also, I haven't read that many short stories, so I'm really excited to give this short story collection a try. And then we have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. Now, I don't know anything about this series except that it's a duology, and Fun Fantasy Books, or Isa, she loved this duology so much and she said it was criminally underrated. Now, my taste doesn't always align perfectly with Fun Fantasy Books, but sometimes it does, and just hearing how much she enjoyed this duology really made me interested. So yeah, I really don't know anything except that she loved it, so we will see. And then I also really want to read the sequel to Vicky 7 by Edward Ashton. Now, I read this art copy last year and I really enjoyed it, and the surprising thing is, this is a sci-fi novel, but the blend of humor and not being too heavy on the science, but still having a fascinating concept and great pacing just really allowed me to thoroughly enjoy this novel. And this book is getting an adaptation with Robert Pattinson playing the protagonist, so I'm really surprised that not more people have actually picked up this book. Now, the sequel Antimatter Blues recently came out and I've heard almost no one talk about it, but I really enjoyed Mickey 7, so I'll definitely need to give Antimatter Blues a read. Now, you know I love me some good self-published fantasy, and one author that is so popular in the self-published community is Rob J. Hayes, and a lot of people talk about that Never Die by Rob J. Hayes is one of the best starting points if you want to get into his work, and it is again a standalone, which I always loved. So yeah, I really feel like I really need to give some of his work a read, and also these covers are gorgeous. And then we have Hyperion by Dan Simmons, another book that so many people have recommended if you are struggling to get into the sci-fi genre. People say that this book is one of the greatest sci-fi books of all time. Daniel Green, he absolutely loves it, and it's an absolute classic. Now, apparently book 1 and book 2 are very different, but I definitely want to give at least the first book a try. And I'm not really sure why, but I'm just expecting to absolutely love this book, even though I know nothing about it. And then we have the Bone Shard Daughter trilogy by Andrea Stewart, which is actually a trilogy I did give a try a couple of years ago. I read the first book and I just really didn't enjoy it. I didn't vibe with the characters or the writing style, and I just found the plot to be not that interesting. But that trilogy just feels like it's a trilogy that I should have absolutely loved. And again, so many people seem to absolutely love it, because I did enjoy some aspects of the world building. The magic system was fascinating, and in the past I've sometimes discovered that actually picking up a book that didn't work for you later on will actually really change that reading experience. And I do have a feeling that this trilogy might be one of those cases where maybe I just wasn't in the right state of mind when I picked it up the first time, so we will see. But yeah, I definitely want to give this whole trilogy another try soon. And then we have The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, or actually that whole trilogy. Again, a trilogy that people say is criminally underrated, and Brian Lee Durfee, he's a YouTuber as well, and I really enjoy watching his content, and particularly recently finished a trilogy and said it was one of the best trilogy he has ever read. So yeah, I don't really need to hear more to be convinced that I really need to at least give the first book a read, but those books are seriously chunky. So yeah, again, one of those trilogies where you really need to commit a bit of time to actually get into it. And then we have Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I feel like I'm probably one of the only persons on BookTube that hasn't read this book. Everyone raves about it, and people say that if you like John Gwynne, and I read all of John Gwynne's books and I've loved them so much, then this is a perfect read for you. And I haven't read that many African-inspired fantasy novels, so just the fact that people compared this book to John Gwynne's writing and the fact that it's African-inspired just makes me so excited. Also, how cool is this cover? And now we have some seriously epic fantasy series. Firstly, I would love to give Empire in Black and Gold by Adrian Tchaikovsky a read. Now, this is a 10-book series, I believe, and all of these books are quite chunky. Now, this is definitely the series that almost no one talks about at all in the BookTube community. Now, I know the Library of Alexandria, He has at least read many of these books, maybe the whole series, and he has loved this series. And Andrew is an author where I read 2 of his books, and none of them have worked, but both of them were sci-fi novels, and this is the magnus opus when it comes to his fantasy works, this 10-book series. So I'm definitely intrigued, and this is a really nice addition. And again, the fact that this seems to be like an underrated series always makes me a bit intrigued. So I definitely want to give at least the first book a read, and hopefully I'll absolutely fall in love with the whole series and read all 10 books this year. But I don't expect that to happen. We're almost at the end. The other massive series I would love to give a read is Chronicles of Black Company by Glenn Cook. Now, a lot of people say that he's almost like the godfather of the grimdark genre, which I'm not sure if that's true, but I believe there are at least 10 books set in this universe, and similar to the realms of the Elderlings, you have like different trilogies and quartets and stuff like that. Now, I know almost nothing about this series except that it's grimdark, it's military fantasy, and it's a very polarizing series. A lot of people seem to absolutely love the Black Company series, but a lot of people also say that the writing style is dry and it's boring, so I'm definitely intrigued. And I recently went into a charity shop and I found this omnibus where you have the first trilogy in one book. So I don't really have an excuse for not at least giving the first book a read, because they're all relatively short. And the last book I've added to my TBR is Sons of Darkness by Gura Mohanty, which is an epic fantasy Indian-inspired grimdark novel, which I believe is probably the first of its kind, and it sounds fascinating. This was originally self-published, but it's recently been picked up by Head of Zeus, and they were kind enough to send me an R copy. It's a very cool cover, and I know that Patrick Leo and Johanna have read this novel, and they really enjoyed it, so I'm definitely intrigued. So that is it. Those are the 48 books I've added to my TBR in the first 5 months of 2023. Have you read any of these? Which one do you think I should prioritize? Definitely let me know your thoughts, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to my Patreon support what I do here. I really appreciate it.